Welcome to the Health by Haven podcast. I'm your host, Haven Quinlan. If you're a multi-passionate wellness enthusiast, then you're in the right place. I'm obsessed with learning as much as I can about the wellness world, and I want to share that with you. Each episode will dive into various aspects of health and wellness through inspiring and informative guest interviews with some solo episodes thrown in. Tune in for all things health, and let's have some fun, shall we? Emily Miller is a licensed professional counselor who's passionate about helping people create better relationships with food and their bodies so they can focus on everything else that's important to them in their lives. She has worked with clients with eating disorders and related struggles since 2017 and opened her private practice, Apricity Counseling in South Carolina in 2024. In the episode, Emily gives us a great one-on-one on disordered eating and eating disorders. We discuss common diagnoses, how to identify if you're struggling with disordered eating habits, how to get help, how to support loved ones who may be struggling, and how to talk to kids about food and their bodies in a supportive way. She gives tons of tangible tips and resources that you can utilize and implement today to build a better relationship with food and your body. I learned so much from this conversation with Emily, and I know you will too. So let's get into it. Before we get started, in part of today's conversation, Emily shares a bit about how eating disorders are diagnosed. She wanted to note that she mentioned the DSM has significantly low weight as a criteria for anorexia, but that a large portion of eating disorder providers take issue with this. She notes that the weight criteria unfortunately helps perpetuate the stigma and misconceptions that everyone with a restrictive eating disorder is underweight, or that restrictive behaviors are only dangerous if someone is underweight. This is far from the truth. People in all sizes of bodies can have anorexia or any eating disorder, whether they lose weight or not. It's really about the behaviors and the thought patterns, not the weight. Weight is not an indicator of severity of eating disorder. These misconceptions can be harmful because, as we discuss in today's episode, they can contribute to people not being appropriately diagnosed, as well as not having access to treatment. For more context, someone who is not underweight but meets all the other criteria for anorexia would most likely be diagnosed with the other category, if diagnosed at all. So this person's struggle is far less likely to be noticed and taken seriously. And even if it is identified with the other diagnosis, they're less likely to get adequate insurance coverage for their treatment. Regardless of weight, someone engaging in eating disorder behaviors is at risk for a whole host of health complications. Emily even notes that eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of any mental illness, behind only opioid addiction. So weight stigma plays a huge role in eating disorders not getting properly identified and treated. I want to thank Emily for taking the care to point this out, and again encourage you to seek support if you're struggling with these thoughts or behaviors. Now, please join me in welcoming Emily Miller to the Health by Haven podcast. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today on the Health by Haven podcast. This is a topic that affects so many people, women and men, and I'm very excited to dive into it to learn more myself personally and also help educate the listeners to how they can help loved ones who are struggling or how they can get help if they feel like they're struggling with food. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So I know I did a little bit of an intro to get started, but I want to hear from you in your words a little bit about who you are, about the field that you work in, and how you got interested.
Yeah. So my name is Emily Miller, and I am a licensed professional counselor. I specialize in eating disorders, body image, basically anything relationship with body and food is something that I like to do. I currently I have my own private practice in South Carolina, and I'm also licensed in North Carolina, so can kind of serve people in those two states. And I have a history of working at an eating disorder treatment center is kind of where I got started, and then have kind of slowly moved into the outpatient world over the years. Like a lot of people in the eating disorder world, I first got interested in it due to some of my own experiences in the past. And I think that can be, not a requirement, of course, to be in the field, but can be a really common and like special kind of place to start from, to come from like a place of empathy and understanding, to be able to meet clients where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing that background. And a lot of people I talk to in all different areas of health, like usually we have an origin story of like why we're super into this. So I think that's like a helpful background for people to know. So when you had to do schooling to like get trained for this, you went and got like educate me a degree in therapy. And then are there like specific things you had to do to specialize in eating disorder recovery?
Yeah, so my graduate degree is in clinical mental health counseling. So that's just kind of like general counseling education. And then I knew going into my program that I wanted to work in the eating disorder world. And so I was able to seek out for my clinical internship, that placement at an eating disorder treatment center so that I was able to kind of get that experience, and learn more about it that way.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because I'm sure there are like a million different like niche routes you could go down within that field.
Absolutely. For
Okay,
sure.
awesome. And then it sounds like you started at a clinic and then you decided to open your own private practice. I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs as well, even in the health space, like lots of people who have started their own companies, and that is like fascinating to me. So, what was that like making the shift?
Yeah, it was challenging to be very honest. It was scary. I started out, yeah, in a eating disorder treatment center, and then worked in a group practice for a while, working mostly with college students. And just kind of like as I went through my own life and like started having kids and kind of needed some more flexibility, like wanted to kind of be more in charge of my own practice. And so started thinking about making those changes and taking those steps. And I think like most therapists that I talk to who have their own private practices, they say like, kind of the business part and the marketing part is like our least favorite thing. And that is
Yeah.
definitely true for me. I'm not a business person. And so that's definitely been a big learning curve. But it's also been cool to like just this morning, I was, like designing a flyer in Canva, and that can
Yeah.
be really fun. So yeah, it's been hard, but also kind of like exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of like the right brain, left brain type thing. So you're like getting to do a little bit of all of it. So I want today to be a little bit of like a 101 for people. Say they've been blessed and they've never struggled with body image or food, and they don't know, or they think they don't know anyone who's been going through these things. Let's like start out from a really like zoomed out lens. Can we talk a little bit about what it means to have an eating disorder, to have disordered eating tendencies, and how you could maybe identify that for yourself or for others around you if you might be struggling and might be able to benefit from some help from someone like you.
Absolutely. So when I talk about, I often say like eating disorders and disordered eating, and that is like a lot of words, and it might be like, why do you need to say all that every time? And I'll get into some of the specifics, but I think it can be important because when people think about eating disorders, we often have a very specific idea of like what that means or what that looks like. And so people who might be struggling in their relationship with food or their bodies, um, maybe like not to the extent that they imagine an eating disorder to mean, can really just like write it off and be like, oh, that's not me, I'm fine. And maybe won't give themselves the opportunity to learn more about it or get some support. And so disordered eating, kind of encompasses like the spectrum of, it may not be like technically a clinical eating disorder according
Mhm.
to the DSM, but that doesn't mean that you can't be struggling and like distressed with your relationship with food and body, and you can still like deserve to get help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like when I grew up like in health class learning about eating disorders, you know what I mean? It sounded like so incredibly extreme and like you have to be like hospitalized basically to be
Yes,
classified as this. And so I think it's helpful like the older I've gotten and the more I think society has gotten comfortable talking about these hard topics, you learn like, oh, it's not so black and white. There's like a lot of gray area in between.
for sure. And so that's what I kind of want to highlight talking about like diagnoses. So the kind of general, buzzwords that most people know, like anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. Those are the main diagnoses in the DSM. The DSM is the kind of diagnostic manual that defines what mental health disorders are, what's the criteria for meeting them, and understandably, it has to be like pretty specific
Yeah.
and pretty detailed. But also, the drawback of that is that if someone doesn't identify with kind of as extreme of a presentation as is defined in the DSM, then they might think, oh, I don't, kind of qualify for help or for
Mm.
support. Um, so, generally speaking, anorexia nervosa is characterized by restricting your food, um, concern of body image, fear of gaining weight. Um, and then in the DSM, it talks about what they call significantly low weight. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But in general, that's what the DSM defines anorexia as. And
Okay.
then bulimia nervosa is characterized by episodes of overeating or binge eating, and then also any kind of behavior to kind of like make up for that eating or compensate for it, whether that's
Mm.
self-induced vomiting, using laxatives, can even be excessive exercise or fasting. A lot of times we just think about purging as meaning vomiting,
Hmm.
but it can actually be a whole host of things that just have that compensatory kind of quality to it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'll put my hand up. Like, I didn't know that, you know? I thought it was
Yeah.
literally only from purging. So you're already teaching me.
And often with bulimia, there still is that concern for like body image, fear of gaining weight. And then with binge eating disorder, that is characterized by the binge eating episodes, but does not always have those compensatory behaviors. It often has a lot of like shame and secrecy around the
Mm,
binge eating as well.
okay.
But so that's kind of like the what the DSM says. And I mean, I'm not trying to say the DSM is wrong, but it's just like in real life, it's often more complicated than that. Like it's not black and white.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even when you were just talking about like the baseline for anorexia, like in our society in America, how do you even separate like being concerned with weight, wanting to look thin, restricting your food from like it being a legitimate problem that you could really benefit from help versus like all the things society's telling you? Do you know what I mean? I feel like that's a very fine
Absolutely.
line.
Yes, it absolutely can be. And so the majority of people that I see really have a combination of what we call
Okay.
eating disorder behaviors, that restricting, binging, purging, over exercise. And so the kind of like very black and white way to look at it is anorexia, restricting, bulimia, binge purge, binge eating, binging.
Hmm.
But even like within binge eating disorder, for example, I think it can be really fuzzy because most people who I see in my experience who binge eat then have periods of restriction. And so
Mm.
then that could feel like, well, isn't that kind of bulimia then if they're
Yeah.
binging and restricting? Because ultimately, binging and restricting are like two sides of the same coin. The most like predictive thing for binging is restricting. That's what kind of like sets you up to binge in a lot of scenarios. And so it can just be really complicated because people can think, I don't fit neatly into one of those boxes, so it must not be that bad, or I don't really know what that means. But that is actually the majority of people who struggle with an eating disorder.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that, like super high level overview. I think that can be helpful for people because, yeah, I mean, like they do, like probably all go hand in hand, I'd imagine. And I have heard the term, like, I feel like it's been like a little bit buzzier, maybe because I'm in the health space. So would love to hear your thoughts on like orthorexia. I know you kind of mentioned like that maybe falls under the bulimia of like the over exercising and things like that, but could we touch on that as well?
Absolutely. Yes. That is, yeah, not an official DSM diagnosis, but definitely like a recognized phenomenon in the eating
Mm.
disorder world where people typically are super, super health conscious, very concerned with like eating clean or having like a lot of rigidity around their food and exercise routines. And so sometimes that can, yeah, like technically be classified as anorexia or bulimia, but a lot of times it might just kind of fit under the disordered eating
Mm.
umbrella. What's the word? Like whether or not the person is aware that it's somehow a detriment to their life or their like functioning, um,
Yeah.
it can be actually getting in the way of, whether it's like their work, their social relationships, their just like own mental health, like peace of mind.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because you hear people talk about like food noise, and I feel like that could very much fall into this category as well. If you're, and I like to eat, quote, clean as much as I can because
Yeah.
that's how I feel well. But it's also like definitely a fine line where if you're obsessing over it all the time, if you're always thinking about that, like I could definitely see how then that could be a detriment to your mental health, to your relationships, things like that that you've mentioned.
For sure. And so, like you said, it's just such a fine line and can really be just person to person of like, is this causing kind of negative effects in your life? Whether it's physical health, mental health, social health, all the things. But one other thing I want to mention is, or maybe a couple other things, but kind of like diagnoses wise, because there is in the DSM a kind of other like catch all diagnosis, basically like the other category. There's a big
Okay.
clinical name for it, but we don't have to get into that. Um, and so there is like kind of the three, almost what we think of as like main diagnoses, and then this other category. And the other category is actually the most commonly diagnosed one
Hmm.
because it kind of encompasses like the crossover of behaviors or when things don't fit neatly into one of the other boxes. So it's great that they have that diagnosis, but there is kind of this misconception in the general population, as well as even like in the health space and like with doctors and insurance companies,
Hmm.
that the other diagnosis isn't as serious.
Oh.
And so if someone's diagnosed with other specified feeding or eating disorder, that doesn't sound as serious as like anorexia, or like
Yeah.
we didn't learn about that in health class in middle school.
Right.
And so it can, one, just like their own perception of like, oh, it must not be that bad, but also it gets into like insurance companies don't cover treatment as often for
Mhm.
the other specified diagnosis. And so even though it's kind of all semantics, it actually has a big effect on the way that people are able to access care and have it covered.
Wow. Okay. And that could be a whole nother
It
topic of
certainly
like
could, yes.
healthcare and all of the intricacies. I could definitely get on a high horse about it, but let's chat about that a little bit. Access to care. First of all, like maybe let me even zoom back, like understanding. Oh, like recognizing you might have some of these patterns in yourself and figuring out where you fall on that fine
Mhm.
line to even decide if you want to start like trying to seek out help.
This is a pretty vague statement, but if hearing about any of this stuff, you wonder, like, could that be me? That might be a sign that like that you identify with that to some degree, right? Like
Mm.
I think it is much more common in my experience for people to be struggling and not know it
Mm.
consciously than to think they may be struggling and then have someone, a professional be like, actually, you're fine. Like that just
Yeah.
doesn't happen very often. And
Yeah.
so if it's something that's like that kind of is on your mind and keeps coming back up where you're like, is this a problem? I don't really know. Then, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to like, you know, go to residential treatment all of a sudden, but it might be beneficial to talk to a therapist about it, to talk to a doctor about it, and just kind of see like, is this something that I could get to a healthier place with?
I love that you just said that because I think the same goes for really any category of mental health, anxiety,
Yes.
depression, things like that. If you feel like, oh, maybe I identify, why not? Like,
Yeah.
go try to get help and feel better.
Mhm. And the way that like psychology defines like what is normal and abnormal, like one of the main things in there is like, is it causing you distress and getting in the way of your life? And that's so
Mm.
subjective. So if it's something that like, you kind of can't get off your mind, then I think that's a pretty good indicator that it's like, hey, you might benefit from talking about this.
If you're a parent, you know how intense the school year can be for kids. Academics, activities, social stress, and just the pace of life. What a lot of families don't realize is that kids often carry that stress in their nervous system long after the school year ends. This one's a little personal for me. I've known Dr. Brittany since we were teenagers on dance team together, and seeing her now support families in this way is really special. At Foundation of Stone Pediatric and Perinatal Family Chiropractic in Knoxville, Tennessee, they focus on helping kids regulate, recover, and build resilience through gentle nervous system-based chiropractic care. Summer is one of the best times to start because kids aren't as overwhelmed with schedules and there's space to focus on their development. You can learn more at tnkidschiro.com, supporting healthy kids from the inside out. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so say someone's listening, they're like, okay, actually, maybe I would go benefit from talking to somebody. What are their like next steps where they can find good care that fits with them?
Yeah, so I would recommend starting out looking for a therapist who specializes in eating disorders, disordered eating. Um, there are so many professionals out there, like kind of in the eating disorder world, whether it's therapists, dietitians, doctors, psychiatrists, but it can be tricky because even within the health space, there's so many misconceptions. Like if people haven't specifically been exposed to eating disorders and trained in eating disorders, they can actually end up doing a lot of harm.
Mm.
And so that is something that I just kind of want to put out there that like if someone tries to get help for an eating disorder and they feel really invalidated or like, oh, that was not a good experience, like I know it's so hard to like try again, but just like you might have unfortunately connected with someone who doesn't actually know that much about eating disorders. And so, I mean, I think Google is a great place to start.
Mhm.
Psychology Today is a website that has a bunch of different therapists, like you can search for your area. And so, specifically looking for a provider that says they specialize in eating disorders, I think is an important place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know you mentioned like dietitians as well. Do your clients like are they also working with a dietitian? What does that structure look like?
Yeah, so a lot of them are, not everybody, but it kind of depends on the person. If I have a client who kind of has a more like extreme eating disorder, and it's affecting their life like really significantly, then I definitely recommend having kind of both a therapist and a dietitian, usually a doctor as well, a psychiatrist, kind
Yeah.
of like the whole team. It's definitely helpful with eating disorders since they affect like so many aspects. They're physical, they're mental, they kind of cross over,
Mm.
to have what we call like a treatment team. And
Yeah.
so often, if you're connected with either a therapist or a dietitian, they probably know people in the other field that they can get you connected to, because it can be really helpful to kind of like have both spaces. Of course, it can also be like financial consideration and stuff. I know that may not always be possible for people, but
Hmm.
if possible, it can be helpful to like really be able to focus on just the food part with the
Mm.
dietitian because one, even though eating disorder therapists like usually know some about food, like I am not a dietitian. I cannot make a meal plan for someone and tell them what they, should or shouldn't be eating. And so really trying to separate out the like food and then the emotions can be
Mm.
helpful to have those two kind of separate spaces.
Right. And I love that you say like care team, like almost just like adding tools to your toolbox to have different resources to help you feel better.
Yeah.
Okay, you brought up food and emotion. So let's just go there as well because I feel like it's very hard to separate those two things, and most of the listeners are in the US. And so at least in America, a lot of celebration is around food and beverage. It's your birthday, you're going to have a cake, things like that. So talk to me a little bit about how those two affect each other.
Because they're so interrelated, and that's also not a bad thing. Like they are, I think it's impossible to separate out food and emotions, like you said. And it's not always, I think oftentimes if people are struggling with it, they think of it in a negative way of like, oh, if I'm stressed, I eat, or if I'm stressed, my stomach hurts and I can't eat. But there's also a lot of like positive connection around food and emotions, whether it's celebrations, socializing, like family time, things like that, like your favorite comfort foods from when you're a kid, recipes you pass down. So it doesn't have to be all inherently negative.
Mm.
That's just maybe what might pop up more often if we're already in that place of struggling. But yeah, so very interconnected. I think that that is one of the main kind of like underlying causes kind of for eating disorders. Like that varies widely from person to person, but it's often some kind of connection between
Mm.
using behaviors around food, body, exercise to help cope with some kind of emotions that are
Mm.
going on. Sometimes that can be really like consciously of like, oh, I'm stressed today, I'm not going to eat. But a lot of times it can be much more kind of subconscious, and it just kind of, whether restricting, binging, purging, whatever, it might help lower the anxiety, help us feel a little bit of a sense of control, even though it's important to note it is a false sense of control. But in the moment, short term, it can feel really relieving.
Yeah, of course. And I'm glad you brought that up because I certainly know people who have been going through a really hard time with something completely unrelated to food or nutrition. They have a really stressful or traumatic thing go on in their life, and that kind of coincides when they've developed disordered eating habits. And like you said, like I'm sure it's a sense of control if you're feeling like super out of
Yeah.
control world. So, do you find that that's often the case, or do you feel like it's more often a body image thing, or like, I don't know, does it just depend?
It totally depends, and I know that's a feels like a cop out answer maybe, but yeah, it's all of the things, and often a combination of them too. I think oftentimes, from my experience, the goal of therapy when you have an eating disorder isn't to find out like why exactly did this happen. It's like it can absolutely be helpful to try to figure out like what contributed to this, what factors were kind of at play. And a lot of times it can be a combination of body image, like a lot of the messages we get from whether family, the world, media. Um, we say that usually like there's a genetic predisposition for it. And there's a
Hmm,
lot of research going on about this.
interesting.
That there's some sort of genetic predisposition. That does not mean you automatically will have an eating disorder,
Hmm.
but you're predisposed. And then something environmental kind of triggers it. That can be a stressful situation, a traumatic event, um, big life changes and transitions. Like going to college is a huge time that disordered eating comes out for people. Um, Even like going on some sort of like fad diet can be kind of a trigger for your body being like,
Hmm.
oh, we're switching that on now. And now that's the mindset.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm sure we have lots of parents listening, and I have to shout out mine because I feel like they really set a really healthy foundation for me around food as a kid. And that I know is not always the case. And so I feel very lucky that I grew up in that environment. But for people who have little ones, whether or not they grew up in a good food environment, they want to do better by their kids, like what are some suggestions that you would have to, if they have a genetic predisposition or whatever, like build those healthy foundations from a young age?
Yes, I'm very excited we've gone this direction because that's actually like something that I love.
Yeah.
Not that I know all like the right answers to it, but I'm fascinated by that topic of like
Hmm.
parents and kids. And I think for so many people that is something that they really connect with because I've met so many people who are like, well, yeah, I've always had a complicated relationship with food or my body, but I've just kind of dealt with it, right? Like
Hmm.
it's whatever. But then when they have kids, suddenly they're like, oh no, what am I like? This feels like it really matters now. And
Yeah.
of course, I want to say it also matters when it's just you, but
Yeah.
I totally get that, like, when there's a little person involved and we're responsible for them, suddenly it can feel a lot more important and it might come to the forefront. So yes, I could talk about this forever, but some of the maybe kind of like basic suggestions are around body image, trying to use very like neutral language around your body, their body, other people's bodies. It's so common, especially for women, right, to like to make negative comments about themselves, even just in passing, of like, oh, these pants are so tight, or oh, I look terrible in that picture, or oh, please don't take a picture of me right now. And those can be like very normal things to say. We don't have to feel like shameful if we say those things, but just to notice that there's so much shame kind of baked into the way that we talk about bodies and food. And so trying to talk about our bodies using as neutral language as possible when something's too small and we grow out of it, saying like, this doesn't work for my body anymore, which is like a normal thing about growing and changing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good way to phrase it. And it seems so simple, but like something you would have to like practice saying, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. And around food, like it's so normal in our society to use words like good, bad, healthy, unhealthy. And of course it can be so natural. And I mean, I do it too. It's not, you don't have to be perfect at it, but just trying to be aware of that, of trying to use maybe like more neutral, descriptive words around food, describing like taste, temperature, texture. You can use like, even like with kids, especially use like silly words. But yeah, when we use words like healthy, unhealthy, good, bad, clean food, junk food, like it just kind of sets the stage for people kind of thinking about a food as like a bad food. And then thinking like, oh, if I eat that bad food, I am now bad, or I am now unhealthy. Or if I eat junk food, that means, yeah, I'm not as good as someone who can resist junk food. And so trying to just be like as neutral as possible with all foods and think more about like, foods that make us feel good, foods that like have nutrients, that do different things for us can, I think, hopefully be a much more beneficial way to talk to kids about food and bodies.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't have my own children, so I can't fully relate, but like I'm very health conscious. It's something that is really fascinating to me and like how to feel my best every day. And I think most of the people listening to this podcast probably have some sort of health interest if they're listening. And so I don't know, can we like dive a little bit more maybe into that? Like how to teach children that these are, whatever, quote, healthy foods. Like these are foods that are going to nourish their bodies without, I don't know, doing the fear mongering around like the quote, unhealthier foods, like how to say all of those things without like traumatizing them forever, basically.
Yes, that is a really good question.
How
And
don't you have all the answers for us? I mean, come
I,
on.
I wish I did. Because yeah, I mean, even like coming from like being an eating disorder therapist with my own young kids, I mean, my 2.5-year-old this morning like asked if she could have cake for breakfast, and I, felt like I should know the answer to that because I said no, but I was like, well, why do I tell her we can't have cake for breakfast in a way that aligns with what I believe and what I want to teach her, and that
Yeah.
she can understand at 2.5.
Yeah.
So complicated. There's no perfect way. But yeah, I had to even think for a second to think like, how do I even want to put that into
I
words?
know. I know. It's so hard. So I've seen like graphics from some, like health websites or whatever that I follow on Instagram, putting out like, talk to your kids about like the colors of the rainbow and like what are the different nutrients and different colored fruits and vegetables. Like, is that something that you've done or would suggest? Like other things like along that line, maybe?
Yeah, I think at the absolutely focusing on orange foods are like good for our eyes, or, like blueberries and blue foods like have antioxidants in them, and those are good for our immune system. And even foods like, foods that people might generally see as like not healthy, quote unquote. Like, no, like birthday cake like helps us celebrate. So instead of
Yeah.
saying, like, oh, birthday cake doesn't have vitamins and minerals in it, talking about what it does have. And so focusing on how do we like eat these foods, use these foods, connect over these foods, whether it's in a very nutritional way or more of a like emotions connecting way.
Okay, I like that a lot. Like this helps us celebrate like things that you can call out of like the fun things about foods that maybe don't have as like high of a nutritional value if you're like purely
Mhm.
looking at numbers.
Yeah, and with kids, I mean, even with adults, it's hard to think about like what makes us feel good because in the moment, ice cream. I love ice cream. Ice cream makes me feel good.
Yeah.
But if we only ate ice cream, that would not make us feel good. And so I think especially with kids, it's harder to think about that like long term, have
Mm.
them understand like, oh, if I only eat ice cream, I'm not going to feel good tonight. But trying to think about like focusing on how it helps us feel or if we only have ice cream for lunch like we probably won't have the energy to like play soccer this afternoon. So instead of saying like because it's a bad food and you shouldn't have it, try to think about like how it allows us to live our lives.
Okay, I love that actually. Like, kind of putting it into almost like layman's terms for children. Like, if we eat the ice cream, we won't have the energy for soccer practice. And don't you love like running around and chasing the ball with your friends? That's so
Yeah.
fun. Summer has a way of filling up fast. Vacations, family plans, longer days, and somehow less time to actually recharge. If you've been telling yourself you'll slow down eventually, this is your reminder to make it intentional. Taking a break isn't a luxury, it's part of staying healthy. Your body keeps the score of stress, tension, and burnout. And one of the simplest ways to reset? Making space to truly relax. That's where Avoda Massage Therapy comes in. Whether you're dealing with tight shoulders, low back pain, or just feeling mentally drained, their personalized sessions are designed to help you recover, not just get by. Think of it as maintenance for your body and mind, something you schedule just like any other priority. So, this summer, don't wait until you're completely worn out. Book the break you actually need. Visit Avoda Massage Therapy and give yourself permission to pause. If people are listening and they're like, actually, like maybe I do think I could benefit from seeing a therapist who specializes in disordered eating, eating disorders, but they're like really nervous. Maybe they've like never gone to any type of therapist before, or they've never really explored like what talking about their nutrition looks like. Could you walk us through, at least from your practice and your lens, like what it would look like? You can even use me as an example. If I came in and like I'm your client for the first time, like what is that for first visit like? What are we doing? What are we talking about?
Yes. So in general, if you're when you're looking for a therapist, I would recommend, absolutely looking at like their website and things like that. They're not websites aren't perfect representations of you as a person, of course, but it can help you try to get like their vibe. Does it seem like this is someone I could feel comfortable talking to? Most therapists offer like a free consultation, kind of an initial call to kind of ask questions, see how it feels before you like make a commitment and have like a financial obligation.
Mm,
So that can be something. It's very common for people to have like a 15-minute consultation with several different therapists.
mm.
That's not like cheating on your therapist. Like before you get started, it is absolutely recommended to talk to a couple different people for that initial consultation and see what that feels like. And then once you pick someone who you're like, I think this is the person I want to go with. Um, Typically for me, that first appointment, I try to keep it like pretty casual, pretty comfortable. Like the whole point of that first session is to help them feel comfortable. Most therapists have some kind of idea of like how hard it is to go to therapy for the
Yeah.
first time. Even if you've been to therapy before, I mean, even just personally myself, I mean, I started with a new therapist a couple of months ago and I was blown away by how nervous I was. I was like, I have
Yeah.
been to a lot of therapy in my life. I am a therapist. And I was having a panic attack before meeting this new person. So like we know it's hard. And so my goal when meeting with someone new is to totally just help them feel comfortable and help them feel like, oh, this is a person I can talk to. Not necessarily trying to prove to them that I have all the answers, or because I don't, first of all, but just trying to be like in a relational way. Could you feel safe here? And some therapists might start out with kind of a list of questions of like, this is what we have to cover in the first session. But for most therapists I know, and for myself, I generally ask someone like, hey, sometimes people come in and they're ready to just like start talking. Sometimes it's helpful for me to ask questions to kind of, give prompts and stuff like that. So trying to give you as the client a lot of choice and like autonomy in how is this going to go? Do you want me to lead more? Do you want to lead? Because you totally can. And just trying to help get comfortable, but overall get an overview of like, why are you here? What's going on? What are you comfortable talking about? Because I think that's also important for people to know that like, whether or not your therapist says this to you, you are allowed to decide what you want to talk about in therapy. And so just because your therapist asks a question does not mean that you have to deep dive into that. So I think it's important to know, maybe it's like, oh, hey, I am kind of starting to explore if my relationship with food could be an issue, but maybe I don't want to talk about like, the details of my purging yet. That's okay. In general, I would recommend, don't like lie to your therapist on purpose. But in the beginning, as you're getting comfortable, it's so normal to be like, I might not be ready to say everything in the very first session. And most therapists are aware of that and respect that and would not expect you to just like, tell your deepest, darkest secrets in the very first session.
Hopefully everyone listening just like drop their shoulders a little bit, because I think you just gave people so much power back. Like it is so intimidating and overwhelming to be like, yeah, actually I'm going to like pour out my entire soul and all of my deepest, darkest secrets to an absolute stranger who I may or may not like continue to go and see. And I don't want them to judge me. And I don't want, XYZ, like things that could be floating around in your head. And to know that it's not going to be like drill sergeant questioning, or interrogation questioning. It's not going to be like, you're like in a news interview and we're trying to like, you're a famous pop star and we're trying to exploit all your secrets and like tell us the answers to all of these things. Like it's more like you share what you want to share, and hopefully it helps and you continue to want to share those things so that you have like a better relationship with all of it.
Definitely. And like I said, I mean, every therapist has their own style. And so sometimes you might be in a situation where you're like, oh, that felt a little bit more like interviewee than I was hoping it would. First of all, like, and I know this is challenging, but like, that's always something you can talk to your therapist about. Therapists are, generally speaking, very open to feedback and like want to do what will help you. So there are definitely times with clients where I've noticed myself being like, oh, I feel like I'm like asking a lot of questions. Should we like, and so I'll like say that and be like, hey, I'm kind of getting in this, feeling like I'm interrogating you. Like, do you want to back up a little bit? And so that can be so helpful, even though it can be hard to like assert your needs, set boundaries, ask for what you're needing. That is something that hopefully all therapists would be open to. If something feels a little off. And ultimately, if you have a couple sessions and you're like, you know what, this just isn't vibing the way I want it to. I know it's hard also to be like, I have to start over with somebody else, but there are so many therapists out there. And like, so finding the right fit for you is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. No matter what you're going to see them for, right? But I think I heard somebody say this once, but it's almost like dating, like shop around a little bit and find somebody that you click with.
Yes, for sure. Because that, all the research and everything says that like regardless of the topic you're going to therapy about or the specific like modality the therapist uses, the interventions they use, like the number one important thing in a therapeutic relationship is the relationship. And so someone that you feel comfortable with, someone that you feel like you can connect with and understands you is always most important in my opinion.
Absolutely. I love that sentiment. So, for people listening who they feel like they're in a great place with food, which is wonderful. Like, we love that for you.
Congratulations. Yes.
That's so amazing. But maybe they have a loved one in their life that they've kind of maybe like observed some tendencies that they, and we're not in charge of other people, but like maybe you've observed some tendencies and you feel like someone you love is really struggling, or someone you love is really struggling and they're already working towards getting help. Could you speak a little bit to how we could support those people in our lives? Because it's also like really challenging to see people you love struggling as well.
For sure. I'll kind of start with the like, if you know, if you suspect that someone's struggling, but they're not like actively getting help,
Mhm.
then yeah, I think it's important to remember, like you said, that like we don't know everything about other people. And so we could be wrong. We might not know the whole story, but it's also very valid to want to like bring this up with somebody. And so I think coming from a place of curiosity and caring, not from a place of, I know better, you're doing this wrong, kind of like that is a recipe for people getting defensive and feeling shameful and all that. And so trying to approach it in like hey, I'm noticing blank. Or, I feel worried when I notice that you haven't eaten lunch all week, or I get concerned when I think I might hear you throwing up in the bathroom. And so using those kind of foundational I statements, I feel this way, I notice this, trying to see if the person might be open to talking about it, whether it's offering to help them find professional support or just letting them know like, hey, I'm here. Like, even as just a layperson, like you don't have to be an expert at this, but just knowing that someone is there to listen to you, to support you. If you wanted to take the steps to move forward, that can be such a relief to just know that there's someone who isn't going to like jump down your throat if you say like, hey, yeah, actually, this is a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And then what about for those who they've identified themselves like, hey, this is something I need help with, but they're continuing to struggle? Like, how can we support them?
Yeah. So I think with people who are currently going through some sort of treatment process, being aware of of how we talk about food and bodies around them. Like, we don't know exactly what is going to trigger each individual person, but in general, trying to, like we said, like not talk about like good or bad foods, or like comment on other people's bodies, comment on our own bodies. Comment on their bodies. Like, something that I see so often is, especially if someone is maybe like has been underweight and is going through like a weight restoration process in the treatment, people will say like, oh my gosh, like you look so healthy, like you look so much better. And they totally mean it as a positive thing, right?
Hmm.
But for the person struggling, that's not always how it sounds. To like the eating disorder part of their brain, that can sound very much like, you've gained weight, I've noticed, you look different. And so just trying to stay away from any body comments, I think,
Hmm.
is what I would recommend the most. And understanding that ultimately, like, eating disorders are such a complicated mix of like, it's about food in our bodies, but it's also not. And so knowing that it's like there's so many emotions, and trying to get to a place to support the person with emotions and how they're feeling, and not just the logistics of food, I think can be important to remember.
Absolutely. And, all those tools we talked about when talking to kids about food, or just like generally avoiding comments about food or bodies, like we could implement all the time to anyone, like whether or not we know they're struggling, whether they're a child or an adult. Like, maybe we like reframe that instead of like, let's talk to kids about food in like not good or bad, but like in nourishment and energy and fun. Like, why don't we all just do that all the time?
Yeah, super simple. Let's do that, please.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, drop mic. Like, we'll just fix the whole like societal images
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
here if we all do
Well,
that.
and I will say that like with kids and stuff, there are so many great like books out there. Like, there's so many resources these days. One of my daughter's favorite books. It's called Bodies Are Cool. And it just talks about like body diversity in a very like simple way that kids can understand, but just basically like normalizes all different kinds of bodies. And I I love being able to like just share that kind of stuff with her, hoping that it really sets the stage for her thinking about bodies differently than a lot of us learn to.
Yes, I love that so much. Any other tidbits, like people you follow on social or other books or other resources, whether it's for kids or not, that you're like, I want to plug this because these have been really helpful?
Yeah, I a really great website is the National Eating Disorder Association, NEDA, NEDA, has all sorts of really great like statistics, like things you can learn about, support groups for whether it's like you're the person struggling or you're the loved one of somebody struggling. So yeah, places like that. And NEDA is not the only one, but that's a big one that just has like so many good resources because there are so many facets of this. And so I think that can be a good place to start just in terms of like educating yourself.
I love it. And are there, I imagine there's got to be like support groups as well.
For sure. There are so many support groups out there, and especially in the last several years, there are a lot of virtual support groups.
Mm.
And so it can be super like easy, convenient. There are a lot of like kind of like nonprofits that have support groups, both for people struggling and for loved ones of people struggling. Also, a lot of treatment centers have support groups, not only for like alumni of the treatment centers, but just like open to people in the community. So that can be a place to like look for resources too. If there is an eating disorder treatment center, in your state or in your area, looking at their website for resources, especially local resources, can be a good place to start.
Yes, I love it. Well, I think you've provided like so many tangible action tips for people like in different facets, whether they feel like they're struggling, they have a loved one who's struggling, if they just want to learn more, if they want to teach their kids in a healthy way, how to look at food in their bodies. So I think this is going to be super, super helpful. Any like parting words? I want to make sure, I know that we can't possibly cover everything in 1 hour, but like any parting words you want to make sure people take away from this conversation?
Yeah, if I had to give you like a couple things to like look more into, if I had to give you some homework or things to research, because with all the extra time that we all have,
Yeah.
but yeah, like if you want to learn more about this, some of the main kind of like frameworks that I like to practice from, and that a lot of people in kind of the eating disorder space approach this work from, body neutrality is a great thing to look up and learn about. Most people, are aware of like body positivity, and that can be great and work for some people, but body neutrality is kind of like a lesser known approach to body image that can feel more realistic and tangible for people. So
Mm-mm.
I recommend body neutrality. Health at every size is an approach to health that really tries to separate our health status from our weight. Like they can be connected, but they are not always. And so, like, you cannot tell how healthy or unhealthy someone is by looking at them.
Mhm.
So, health at every size, a great thing to look into as well. And then, intuitive eating is if you have an active eating disorder, like, it's not super simple to just automatically switch to intuitive eating and listening to your body. So, not to make it sound simple, but that is often the goal for a lot of people going through trying to heal their relationship with food, is moving towards, instead of like following rules that we've learned around food, trying to instead think about like, what makes my body feel good? What am I craving? What, helps me do the things that I like to do? And so body neutrality, health at every size, intuitive eating are some recommendations that I would have for people who want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into this world.
Yeah, amazing. Well, hopefully people are feeling like really motivated to learn more for themselves, for their loved ones, and just try to have like a more well-rounded experience around food and around their bodies so that they can feel good because it's not the goal.
Always, yes. Flexibility and feeling good.
Amazing. And Emily, if people are in North or South Carolina and they want to work with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my practice is called Apricity Counseling, and it's a word not many people know. So basically, if you Google Emily Miller, therapist, South Carolina, I will pop up and you can find me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for your time today. I just really enjoyed our conversation. I learned so much, and I hope that everyone listening will as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been fun, and I hope that, I hope people can take something away from this.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Health by Haven podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review. It makes such a huge difference in reaching new people and spreading the joy of healthy living. I would also be so appreciative if you subscribe to the show in the listening app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Your support truly means the world to me. Have a happy, healthy day, and I'll talk to you again soon.